Good morning, everyone. Thank y'all for being here. My name is Nelson Vaughan, and before we get started, by show of hands, are any of y'all familiar with what emotional intelligence is? Hayden? Okay, so probably half of y'all. Um, so throughout my presentation, I'm going to be going through these three questions. What makes a person successful? Is it work ethic, how smart you are, or who you know? And why someone can be so intelligent but struggle with like the social aspects of life. So what is emotional intelligence? So emotional intelligence is the ability to control your own emotions as well as understanding the emotions of people around you. So it's made of 5 core components, which is empathy, social skills, self-awareness, self-regulation, and motivation. So empathy would obviously be the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. A lot of people think of empathy as being able to relate to someone, but the truth is you don't really have to have been through what they're going through to empathize with them. Social skills is just the ability to communicate with other people clearly and effectively, obviously, and then self-awareness would be knowing what you're feeling and why you're feeling that way. And then there's self-regulation, which is how you handle your emotions, so different emotions like stress, anxiety, anger, like all those are normal emotions, but how you handle them and not letting them like snowball throughout the day, that would be high self-regulation. And then lastly, motivation is what drives us to do what we do. So someone who's motivated is really goal-driven in what they're doing. Some problems with lack of emotional intelligence. So someone who lacks emotional intelligence is going to blame others. They're going to have low empathy. They're going to lack confidence. They're going to get really defensive easily. They're easily stressed, and they're unable to like receive instruction from others, so they're kind of stuck up in their own ways in a way. So after talking with Mr. Bass, y'all know he's a psychologist, so he has many one-on-one sessions with people, and he brought up the term emotional dysregulation, which is basically a huge part of a huge characteristic in mental health issues. And it's when people have these feelings, but they can't get to the root of it. So they, instead of controlling their emotions, they let their emotions control them. So some psychologists and some people that do therapy sessions, they go to what's called the wheel of emotions, which is basically a wheel that has, I think, like 8 normal emotions everyone feels. And what it does is it helps you kind of get to the root of the issue. So if you're feeling angry, you can kind of go down to why are you angry. Like I think the second column has something like jealousy, and then you can even go farther than that. So it just helps people that that have a low EQ kind of like handle those emotions. So the Bible actually says a lot about emotional intelligence, although it's not deliberate in the word emotional intelligence. It talks a lot about things like self-control and receiving wisdom. So Proverbs 9:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." So what I think this is saying is like, obviously, as people, we're not supposed to fear other people. That's not really what it's saying, but obviously for God it's different. However, when it comes to an interaction with a person, if they're trying to instruct you, and you have 2 choices. So having that respect for someone to, I guess, listen to what they're saying and not, like I mentioned earlier, tensing up and like looking for blame. It's kind of just respecting them enough to listen to them. And then Proverbs 25:28 says, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." So I think part of this is back then, obviously cities had walls that were meant to be defense from like enemies' attacks. So a city with walls that were vulnerable or broken, like that was obvious. They were obviously more vulnerable for attack. So I think Solomon uses a good simile here to describe how a person who lacks self-control is vulnerable for the devil's attacks, for what the world says we should act. So is more like, I guess, prone to act on impulse and act on what they're really feeling, but not how they should react. So comparison IQ. So obviously both, or IQ we know is a complex trait that's influenced by genetic and environmental factors. So some people are just born good at math. Like I think we can all agree like we have gifts, and I think this what we don't know is the same applies for EQ. So some people are born with a gift of to empathize with others. Some people are born with a social gift. So that's the same. However, there's still a question raised to why there's such intelligent people that struggle with like the social aspects of life. So that is because actually IQ doesn't associate with people's skills. So if you're really smart and like no matter what job you go into, if you're really smart, the ability to deal with people is going to be there. So you can do construction, or you can be an engineer, or you can do whatever, and you're going to have to know how to communicate clearly with people and get along with people, because that's what life is. So what I'm saying is for IQ to be fully useful, we need emotional intelligence. So 1 Corinthians 13:1-2 says, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so I could remove mountains but have not love, I am nothing." So I think what's important about this verse is I don't think Paul is talking about emotional intelligence here, because I mean he's talking about love and emotional intelligence are two different things. However, I think it correlates in a way, because like if you have all these gifts and whether that's athleticism or you're good at music or you're intelligent, like if you have all these gifts but you're not stewarding them well, then I think you're missing the point on what it means to be human and what it means to use those gifts well. So how is change going to happen? So when it comes to, or obviously y'all know there's already a huge emphasis on IQ. So there's SAT, there's ACTs, I think the whole point of school has gotten to the point where the higher grade is the best. So like everyone's constantly trying to get the highest GPA, which is great, and I think that's super beneficial for your future. However, with EQ, like when do we ever talk about that, and when is that ever something that is discussed? So my goal is to not tell which one's more important by any means, but it's to bring attention to how important EQ is. So this could look like implementing it into schools. There was a meta-analysis study from Daniel Goleman, who, if y'all don't know who he is, he's kind of like the one who started the whole emotional intelligence movement thing. And it showed that when students, there was like a emotional intelligence class kind of implemented into students' day, and their academic achievement went up 10% and their antisocial behavior went down. So it's proven to help just other aspects of your life. But I think part of this starts with the teacher, because if you're a teacher and you're constantly on your students about like live up to this grade and live up to this standard, and you're forgetting all the, I guess, moral parts of school, like whether that's cheating or anything like that, like I think students are going to be more prone to just try to get by instead of doing it the right way. So some closing thoughts. I think humans need emotional intelligence to truly flourish in the world. If you're someone who feels like you don't have it in school, but you're super social and you're good at that and you're able to relate to others and empathize with them, I think that there's plenty of opportunities for you to be successful in whatever way you want. I don't know, some of y'all might have seen the movie Dead Poets Society, but it's basically a movie about an English teacher who's trying to, I guess, get his students to learn poetry from the heart. So they're doing all these exercises and practices that aren't really, I guess, fun for the students, and because of that they're butting heads. And a student asks like, what's necessary about this, like why are we doing this? And he responds with, we don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion and medicine, law, business, engineering. These are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we set life for. Again, I don't think this quote had anything to do with emotional intelligence, but I think it's really applicable in the way that if all we're looking for in life is to solve algorithms and to get our money up and to just be the most successful we can be and just make money, I think we're missing out on what it means to truly be human. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. So we've got some guests. Do you have any questions or feedback for Nelson? Okay. I'll go first. Give them that. All right, so can you go back to your definition of emotional intelligence? I think it was like the very first slide.
Yeah.
And yeah, go and keep the examples
okay,
up too, because that's kind of, I like how you did that. First of all, good job. I like, we talked one-on-one a lot about this particular topic, because I think it's one of those things that's applicable in all kinds of places. The ability to control one's emotions and also understand people's emotions around you. So when you talk about emotional intelligence, one of the things that you mentioned, and I think it came up a couple of times in your presentation, but you mentioned in terms of morality, in terms of what's right or what's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of like just cold, rational thinking, what I think correlates more with IQ, that can tell us what's right and wrong in any given situation. How much does emotional intelligence overlap with morality? Like you explain a little bit more about like how emotional intelligence can help you track what's right or wrong in a given situation.
Yeah. So I think that it overlaps a lot. Like I think they go hand in hand. That's why I had a lot of quotes and verses about like love, because that's obviously our mission as believers, to love people, love God and love people. I mean, I think you can be emotionally intelligent and not have morals, because I think there's manipulative people out there that know what to say and know how to communicate with others, but they lack the morals, and obviously that's not right. I think that if you're someone, for example, empathy, if you're someone that is able to empathize with others really well, and that's a gift, I think that that's a God-given gift in the way that, like, people need, like, I know all of us need people in our life that can empathize with them and not always tell them what they're doing right, but kind of, like, encourage them through things. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I'll go through another question there. So I like the comparison, because we're familiar with what IQ is. We're familiar with what it means, what we typically mean when we're saying someone has a high IQ. They're good at taking tests, they're good at accomplishing scores, and it gets kind of tricky defining what exactly we're talking about when we're talking about intelligence, right? But in terms of emotional intelligence, it seems like the whole goal of school, of education, is to grow in your, I guess I'm saying IQ, to grow in your, I'd say intelligence, but like more rational, more factual intelligence, right?
Right.
Is it possible to grow, but at the same time, like you mentioned, some folks are just predispositioned towards it. Like they just have this, they're really good at really good at taking tests, they're really good at studying, they're really good at math, they're all those things that you mentioned, right? Is it possible, it seems like it's possible to grow in most kinds of intelligence. Is it possible to grow in your emotional intelligence?
I definitely think so. I know I mentioned that it's something that people are born with, but I think as people, like just like anything we do, like we can train a muscle. And if we're constantly thinking about if we're making ourselves uncomfortable, and if you're someone that's more antisocial or more, what's the word, inclusive, I guess, or introverted, there it is. But if you're someone more introverted, I think that putting yourself out there, and that's, I mean, I feel like that's a part of life, to just put yourself out there and make yourself uncomfortable and force yourself to do things you don't want to do. I think that's obviously improving it. With empathy, I mean, there are people that struggle to understand other people, and that's fine. But I mean, that's, I guess, the gift with, or that's the good thing about emotional intelligence, because it's 5 core components. Like, all these different things you can train. Motivation, something that, like, you can make yourself motivated. Motivation doesn't last, I don't think, but you can make yourself motivated. So, does that answer that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And it's interesting because it's like the 5 things you have up there. I think, like, you brought up like introverted, extroverted people. There, I can probably go through there and say, like, I think extroverted people would be more naturally attuned to social skills, motivation, etc. Whereas introverted people, I think most of the introverted people I know really, that they're really good at empathy. They're really good at empathizing with people.
I agree.
So it seems like it kind of cuts both ways, where introverted people can grow in a particular way, extroverted people can grow, despite the fact that we're all disposed to a particular kind of personality. So, it's really good. Gentlemen, y'all got anything?
How would somebody who is lacking in some of these areas take the steps to improve in these areas?
I think that, let me think about that for a second. We don't need to ask a new question, I just need some time. I mean, I mentioned about, like, making yourself uncomfortable with the social part, but let's say you're someone that is more extroverted. I think sometimes extroverted people struggle with things like empathy, because we talked about introverted people usually being better at empathy. I guess it's something, I mean, it's not going to be natural because we all have different gifts, but I guess it's something where you can kind of just work on it through doing stuff you're not used to doing. Like, that's a hard question, because, I mean, for me, I feel like I'm more introverted at heart. Like, I don't love getting up in front of people and speaking, and I don't love doing all that, but doing it more and more, you get better at it. And that's just something that, like, throughout high school, I've gotten better at this, because freshman year it was bad. But like I said, it's just something that I think you just do over time. Does that make sense? It's kind of hard to answer that in a way.
On that point, like, this is one of those fields where, and I don't know if you call it a field or not, this is one of those topics where, just so that y'all are aware, it's not new in the sense that it's come out in the past few years, but it's new in the sense that in the last, I don't know, probably, like, Vaughan wrote that book maybe like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it kind of, it's one of those things where people are discovering now, where it's like emotional intelligence is helpful for students in school. Like what he mentioned, there's some very limited studies where schools that teach their students emotional intelligence have fewer discipline problems. Like, their grades don't necessarily go up, but they have a lot less disruption. It's like, okay, well, maybe there's some value there. Business owners, business management courses are starting to teach emotional intelligence courses, because managers who have good emotional intelligence tend to work with people better. They may know how to run a budget, and they may know how to run, their IQ in terms of business execution is really good, but meanwhile they're terrible bosses because they don't know how to relate to people. Pastors, I think, would do well to think really, really, like, I think pastors are some of those people who are just already predispositioned to be empathetic, to be kind, to know how to interact with people, know how to deal with people. But I think that's something that is super valuable. I know as a teacher, so yesterday, like, all that to say, yesterday, Mr. Moore was in here. I'm going to talk garbage about him because he's not in here right now. I'm just joking. I'm about to compliment him. Please don't tell him I'm doing so. But he spoke from his perspective as a coach, and Cole and Tarango was sitting back there, and just based on Caroline's presentation about sports or whatever, he saw a personal application where he pointed back to Cole and he said, if Cole strikes out, ... Well, okay, you can have the IQ side of things where it's like, oh man, if Cole strikes out, then what does that give the odds of the next at bat? What does that look like in terms of who's on base? What does that look like in terms of our chances of winning? Like, there's a lot of IQ elements to that, right? But then I think and he didn't call it emotional intelligence, but just as an example, Caroline's presentation caused Coach Moore to look at his player and say, yeah, but when he strikes out and he looks over at me, is he afraid of what I'm going to say, or does he know that I'm for him? I mean, we all, any of us who have played sports, you know what it's looked like to have screwed up and look over at your coach, afraid of what's about to happen, versus looking over at your coach, knowing full well you're good, like looking for support, and that's tracking emotional intelligence. So like, as new of a thing as it is, and as tough as it is to say, well, how do I grow in that kind of stuff? Once you see it, it's kind of hard to not see it. Like, you start seeing it all over the place. Like, yeah, there's the IQ question here. What about the EQ? What about the human question? Like, what are people feeling about this? It was really interesting.
I think another thing that's important, and I didn't mention this, I planned on mentioning it, but I didn't. But like, when it comes to like hiring people, I think that it's been a huge like problem with just hiring someone with a good resume and good like they went through a big college, like, I'm gonna hire this person. Like, I feel like it's important to think about, like, or at least ask around or get to know people in a way that you know what their character's like, because you see, I have that problem slide, I think it's the next one, but like, all of these are problems that I think every business, every school, work, field, anything, they all experience these, and like, especially the blaming part, and just like not taking ownership of things. Like, I think part of that's because like we're just hiring people based off how smart they are, when we're not really getting to know who they are as a person and what they contribute outside of their head knowledge. So I think that's really important in just school, college, hiring. Like, I know for people that didn't get into Clemson, and that Clemson's obviously really hard to get into, like, there's some people that I know that are great kids, and like, I would think that they could get into any college they want to because of their not how smart they are, but how emotionally intelligent, how good of human beings they are, but they didn't get in because they have a 4.2 GPA. So like, I don't know. I think a lot of that's flawed in the way that you're not, like, you don't, I think that should be the first thing you look at whenever you're hiring someone, because there's a lot of, I think, not great people out there that know the answer to every kind of algorithm or anything like that. So.
Classmates ever got anything, Nelson?
I have examples of people like throughout history who have been really smart but didn't have good emotional intelligence.
I mean, yeah, off the top of my head, I mean, I guess you could just think of someone as I say this, but I mean, there's a lot of, I mentioned like manipulative, there's a lot, I mean, those people, Hitler, yeah, he said Hitler, he got a whole country on his back, so I think there's a lot of people out there that are just really manipulative in the way that they know what to say, but they're crappy human beings. So, and there's more examples, because there's athletes that everyone thinks they're great people, and then they do stuff that you're just like, really? And pastors, I think it was Keaton. Did you do yours on mega churches? Yeah. So like, I wasn't here for that, but like, there's a lot of people out there that lack emotional intelligence, but they know how to say the right answers, and I think that that's just a big issue.
You see this a lot, so like, 2 TV shows come to mind, I think are really exemplary of what all this is about. It's an older show, House. I don't know if it's about a medical doctor. It's one of my favorite shows, but it's about a medical doctor who is just like a genius. he's super good at diagnosing people. Like all these doctors are treating diseases and everything, and they're like, oh no, I don't know what's wrong with this person, and he walks in and just like pulls it apart. It's like, oh, you have this. Meanwhile, he's just a jerk. Like everybody hates him. He's losing jobs left and right. He's alienating people. Like the whole show is basically like every episode he figures out something nobody could figure out, and that's the cool part. Meanwhile, as the show progresses, he's pushing everybody in his life important to him. He's pushing them away. That's a very low emotional intelligence. Like he just doesn't know how to deal with people. There's another show. It's a little newer called The Rookie, where it's a cop show. It's Nathan Fillion's in there, and he's this police officer, and he's old, but he's turning a new leaf in his life. He's becoming a police officer, and he's slower than most of the cops because he's old. He's not necessarily smarter. Like he's got to learn all the police codes and all that stuff. Like he doesn't have as much insight into how to be a good cop. But his emotional intelligence is just off the charts, and so he ends up thriving. He ends up making a great police officer because he knows how to interact with people. And so, the SWAT team comes in and is like, oh, we're going to take these people out, and he's able to negotiate with somebody and talk them down and all that stuff. Anyways, in TV you find this a lot where there are certain characters that are very brilliant, but they don't know how to interact with people at all. Meanwhile, there's the opposite, where it's not necessarily the smartest person in the room, but they know they deal well with people. And it's the people element that makes it so interesting. Matt?
So you talked a lot about like I think you kind of said that there's like a balance between the IQ and the EQ.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked a lot about like having a lot of IQ but no EQ. So could there be a negative balance where it's like so much EQ but no IQ, and that's a bad thing? Because like even in that example, like a lot of EQ, a lot of IQ, but seems to be a good thing. But I feel like you could also be like just dumb
Yeah.
and like really
Yeah.
compassionate.
No, that's really true. I mentioned that I don't want to I just want to bring attention to EQ. So I'm not, obviously, if you're super smart, like you have a future because you're super smart, and that's just a fact. But I think that they both go hand in hand in the way that like if you have a lot of EQ but not a lot of IQ, like that could also be not great for you obviously when it comes to your faith and when it comes to how you are as a human being, we're not talking about that. Success wise, yes, like if you're just a dumb person, that's probably you're probably kind of anchored down compared to someone who's really smart. But the same, I think, obviously applies for IQ. If you have a lot of IQ with no EQ, I think you're also held back in a way because a lot of every job is talking to people. So I think that they're similar in that way. I don't think that there's like you'd rather have one and not the other. So.
Yeah.
So, going to the empathy side of things, especially like the social interaction between person and person, do you think lacking empathy can be caused by just people not willing to listen to one another and just wanting to interject and kind of lash out and want to interject their own thoughts and own opinions, and that's just the cause of it? And a lot, like in 2020, we saw that like we social distance and nobody wanted to get near each other. I think that's kind of like with the younger generation, they don't empathize as well as the older generation because they didn't have a chance to have that constant like social interaction. They're kind of like blocked off from an early age.
Yeah, I think over time there's all kinds of outside distractions that have made it like that for our generation. Because parents always talk about we didn't have social media, whatever, which is true. But I think people that are naturally, I think it's its own problem to be arrogant in the way that like I'm not going to listen to you because I know more than you. Like, who are we to say that? I know we had like a whole class on, I think it was this class, about just loving people in that way, to like listen to what they have to say. And you have all kinds of, and that's we going back to the introverted extroverted thing. If you're naturally extroverted, then those people seem like want to get to know people and want to get their name out there, which is great. But if you're, I guess, putting yourself above another human being, that's going to obviously hinder your ability to empathize with people. So, does that answer that?
I like what you said, people like, they don't get into Clemson because they have a
Yeah.
or two, but they're really, you can talk with them, hold a conversation, and they're really outgoing people. How much do you think, how much more do you think is important to have a strong EQ in the sense of like, when looking for jobs? Because I have a 26-year-old sister, went to high school, went to college, did everything. She's probably like the most outgoing person I know. But when applying for a job, you go and you put in your resume and they don't even get to talk to you. It's like, she works as a recruiter right now, and she said some crazy number, like 600 applicants a day.
Yeah.
And I've seen her like do her job, so they just look what you have, and it's just like, oh yes, get an interview. So how important do you think it is, having that college degree or going to a great college but getting out? What is that gonna do for you if you don't even get the chance to like let them know like the person you are and like how outgoing you could be and how well like you could talk to someone and make connections for the business and move forward?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's flawed because, I mean, the fact that they're just like checking people off without even getting to know them, like, I don't think that's right. Unless you have certain things on there that you're like, okay, this person went to jail, like something like that. But I think that it goes back to like what we want out of society. So if we want a flourishing society, which I think everyone wants, like no one wants a bunch of bad people walking around, and no one wants to work for bad people. But if we want a society to flourish how we're supposed to, I think that looking at emotional intelligence first is definitely the better option, because we can talk all day about smart people that are not good human beings. So I think it's super important. Did you ask, do you think it's important, or? Yeah, I think it's definitely should be a priority in hiring someone and looking at resumes. So.
I've met a lot of really smart people in the past that you try to have a conversation with them. It's like they're almost like scared or
Yeah.
you don't know what to say or how to look at you in the eye.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I think you put your finger on part of it. Like, this is what makes us a cultural issue, right? Like, our culture is, in so many ways, it's, whether intentionally or unintentionally, our culture in so many ways tends to benefit people with a particular kind of personality or a particular GPA or whatever. And this is kind of the point. This is kind of the problem that, just because you have those numbers on your resume doesn't mean you're a person worth having around. Not that sounded terrible. Doesn't mean you're a person that people want to be around or that will follow leadership and all that kind of stuff. So Matthew, you kind of put your finger on the point that, like, yeah, maybe this is something that recruiters should pay attention to. And I would say, like, I would encourage any of y'all, like, this is another one of those projects that kind of has a universal benefit to all of it. You take this and put it in your back pocket and think, wherever life lands you, wherever God leads you, whatever job you take, whatever people you have underneath you, just understand you can't judge people by a set of numbers. You can't quantify the kind of person you are. Think about yourself that way. Like, you are more than just whatever numbers you put up in any, whether it's sales numbers or sports numbers or test scores or whatever. You can't quantify the quality of a person, right? Emotional intelligence gives you tools and resources. Growing in your emotional intelligence, you get better at try not to use the word judging, but you get better at interacting. You get better at observing people for who they really are. And that's the whole, like, you put your finger on it. Like, schools aren't doing that. They should. Businesses aren't doing that. They should. So here we have a whole crop of people about to go into the world. Do better. Let's do better. Anything else for Nelson?
I think that this is an important issue, and that like being intentionally showing other people empathy and stuff can help them grow in emotional intelligence. I mean, I struggle with it a lot, and I still do, but as like, as people have been intentional and showed me like empathy and self-regulation, motivation, all those things, I think that that really helped
Yeah.
me grow in those aspects. And I think that being intentional, like me myself, being intentional with other people, that really helps other people grow.
I think it's, like I said, it's the best option for society to flourish as a whole because of reasons like that. So.